Hi guys, welcome back to Introduction to Sociology with Dr. John. I thought today we would discuss different theories of structural change. We'll start with Emile Durkheim. Think about it. Right now you're probably watching this in your home or at a school or maybe in a library, but you could be anywhere. You could be at a coffee shop, the mall, the beach. The internet has radically changed the way we carry out many of our tasks in society, particularly in terms of giving how we get information. It can change the way we get our education, as we are seeing here. It gives us many more choices as individuals to study products before we buy them. But you might ask yourself, has it fundamentally changed society from 50 years ago when you could have done all these same things, maybe in a more static environment, or maybe through the mail a little bit more slowly? But if you were born 200 years ago, you would definitely notice the differences. You would probably not even be studying. You would be working, most likely alongside other family members, unless you had been maybe hired out to another family or to a local factory. You would probably never leave your village or local area except for major events like a pilgrimage or to run away from a war or a disease. Fact is, by your age, assuming you were 15 or 16, you would probably be dead. If you were still alive, you would probably be considered a full adult, and 95% of you or more would be trapped into a lifetime of servitude. History is generally seen as the progression of society between different stages or levels of development, generally classified according to form of social production. And this isn't just the Marxist point of view, this is the overall point of view. But it doesn't mean that it's absolutely correct the way people often think of it. We'll talk about that in a second. But typically the most quote-unquote primitive societies are hunting and gathering societies. This is usually where human technology requires only things like flints, fire, perhaps even fire might not be absolutely necessary, rudimentary shelter. People would have to be mobile for the most part. You couldn't stay in the same area and rely on hunting and gathering. You typically had to move around, and it required a lot of skill and knowledge. These people were not stupid by any means. They had to know not only how to hunt, but the behavior of animals, where they will be at different times of the year. Same thing with gathering, where different types of plants are going to be found, how to use them, because many plants are toxic or dangerous if used in their natural state. So it does require a lot of knowledge and skills. The people who think that hunting gatherers were cavemen, you have the wrong impression. But they did tend to live in small groups because, of course, that they would have less impact on the environment around them. They would usually come together in larger groups. And there was rudimentary division of labor. Typically, the main division would be between hunting and gathering. But even there, people who hunted would also gather food when that was the most efficient thing to do at the time. Sometimes there's no animals to hunt, so you gather. And vice versa. Sometimes, for example, if women were normally gathering, sometimes they would help with the hunt if that was appropriate, and so on and so forth. Now, horticultural society required another step of technology, particularly the understanding of how plants germinate. This knowledge didn't have to come about in a scientific way. It may simply have come about through experiment, basic trial and error experimentation, where people plant the seeds or simply observe that the plant's growing in the same area every time, that if you replant them to a similar area, they will also grow. So this gave people more control over their environment. They didn't have to go to where the plants were. They could bring the plants to them. So it did create stability to a large extent. People would have to stay in the same general area for most of the year because they had to take care of their plants. It also allowed surplus. You would be able to grow more food than you needed to eat. And this, of course, then creates stratification. Not necessarily automatically, but kind of indirectly, because if you've got food to store, for you that might mean, savings for next year in case the crops are bad. But for other tribes, it might be something they can steal. So now you have warriors, thieves, and you have the need to protect yourself. So you might have to have certain people who specialize in protection rackets. And also religion becomes very important. So you start to see religious leaders becoming an elite within societies. So here you start to see a division of labor, and later horticultural societies very often have slavery, which does not exist in hunter-gathering societies, but horticultural societies, because you have a dominated group of growers, sometimes those can become substituted with slaves. Agrarian society is a society where, typically because of higher technology, particularly the plow, the iron plow pulled by a horse, these societies can grow not necessarily more food, but a larger area of food. So the land becomes very important in these societies. The amount of production per person goes up because now animals are doing a lot of the work, whereas in horticultural societies, typically humans did almost all of the actual labor, and it was much more labor intensive. In agrarian societies, you start using animals and basic technologies like windmills and things like that to do a lot of the labor. So it actually frees up some manual labor, and it also creates more surplus and more stability. So therefore, unfortunately, also creates a larger warfaring class and a larger religious class. Typically, you see a shift from polytheism to monotheism in this period. Industrial societies, this is when industry becomes independent, as it were. Normally, we associate this with the rise of the steam engine. The steam engine allows humanity to become independent to a certain extent from the immediate environment. Before that, all industry relied on natural sources of power, such as the wind, such as rivers or water sources, and that was fine, but they were limited to what was available, and of course were not 100% reliable. So the wind might stop, the river might be dry, and that meant you couldn't produce anything. Whereas in industrial societies using a steam engine, this created a certain independence of the immediate environment. Obviously, you're still using the environment, but you have more domination, more control over it. So now they can have permanent, even 24-hour production, once you have electricity, of course, and you have much more complex labor systems, much higher in productivity. Also, this makes trade easier with steam ships and things like that. And inequality becomes even larger because now you have large bureaucracies, you have a managerial class rising up to manage these large industries, and so forth. The next stage, post-industrial society, this is usually seen as post-1970s, 1980s, where knowledge itself becomes the source of power, rather than production itself being the source of wealth. It's the patents and the knowledge in that production that is considered key. Obviously, the internet, or rather computers and the internet, are a key factor in this. So we still have industry, but industry is no longer the core, as it were, of our economic system, or at least this is the argument. But why does society change? What happened to move society from one level to another? Is it simply the matter that people came up with a new idea? Is it simply a technological change that drives everything else? Or are there other parts of society that have to change as well? For example, consider this. Do you think just one person in all of history figured out how to make fire? No, probably many different people at many different times figured out how to make fire, but they didn't always share the information. Power is knowledge. There's no incentive necessarily to tell your enemies how you do something. So a lot of human inventions or things got invented but were never shared. So one thing that has to change is not just the advent of new technology, but new ways of sharing knowledge and also acceptance of new knowledge. So new ways of doing things might not always be accepted. For example, even today, there are hunter-gatherer groups that moved away. It's not like they didn't see other people growing food. It's not like they didn't see other people using industry, but they simply did not like to live that way. They wanted to stay in their way of life. So there are more things just than the ability to technologically change that needs to be explained in order for us to understand social change. So we're going to talk first about Durkheim's explanation of broader social change. Now, as we talked about before, Emile Durkheim was a French sociologist, kind of started the field of sociology professionally. And one of his first books was called The Division of Labor in Society. And he took this topic because he wanted to take the economy and show how the economy was a social construction, essentially. Right? So he developed this social theory to explain how the economy changed. So he wanted to be clear that the economy didn't just change just because of new technologies, like Adam Smith or other previous political economists had argued. They basically said, well, you have a new technology and it spreads and boom, society changes. No, Emile Durkheim wanted to show that there was a social explanation for this change. So let's assume the 5 steps we talked about before. With a little exaggeration, you think about hunter-gatherer society, you could say these people are like people living in a herd. They're all pretty much the same. They're all doing more or less similar things. And for Durkheim, the important thing was what held them together. Right? So obviously, to some extent, they held together because they helped each other. They all had similar interests. They did similar things. So they helped each other, and they were the same as each other. So they had a certain form of solidarity based on the fact that they were similar. Right? As the cow says up on the top left, he's saying, I love all my friends chew the same as me. Right? So he called this mechanical solidarity. Why mechanical? Because it's automatic. Right? We tend to automatically like people who are the same as us. Right? Or we feel a bond with them. So when you go to the party and everybody's dressed as they're all dressed in formal wear. Nobody told you it was a formal wear party. So you came in casual wear. And when you meet another person in casual wear, you're like, oh, you're my friend. We did the same thing, or at least we're ignored like everybody else. So that's the first stage. But over time, the population will grow. And as the population grows, they will start to compete. Right? Because they're doing the same thing. Right? If they're like cows all eating the grass, they're going to end up eating up all the grass. Right? So what will happen though, they're not cows, they're humans. So because they're competing, some of them will either lose or be pushed aside, or maybe they'll just decide, look, there's too much people here, I'm going to go find something else. Right? So if they find something else to do, essentially they create a new specialty. Now, on the one hand, they become different from the other people. Right? They're no longer similar. They now do different things, and they have different interests. But on the other hand, they can trade with the people they were with before. Right? So now, because they do something different, they can trade and exchange, and they're not competing anymore. So he believed this created a new kind of bond between people. Instead of bonding in a social network because they're the same, they bond because they're different and they complement each other. And he kind of paraphrased this with two sayings, right? One saying is, birds of a feather flock together, right? Solidarity based on similarity. The other one is, opposites attract, right? So these are both sayings we're familiar with in English, right? And we can understand the logic to them each, right? Sometimes when somebody's very different from you, you become attracted to them because they can do things that you can't do. So let's look at this in pictures. For example, here you have a hunter, right? He's very lonely, obviously. He's all by himself, right? He wants to be with other people. So here other people come along, population increase. Obviously, you have to have two people to increase population, but we're just keeping this simple. All right, so now he's got friends. Okay, he's like, yay, we have mechanical solidarity because we're just the same. We do all the same things. We hunt the same animals. We drink the same drink. We wear the same clothes, and so on and so forth, right? But as the population keeps increasing, you're going to get to a point where you have competition, right? So now you got a lot of people doing the same thing, and now it's kind of like there are too many people, too many hunters, not enough game. It's like, yeah, buzz off, leave us alone. There's too many of us here, right? So now you have specialization, either because some people are defeated and they're forced to do something different, or because maybe they just decide, wow, I'm not, this is too crowded, I'm going to go find something else. They're going to go find something else. He calls this division of labor, right? The act of specializing. So now we have somebody doing something different. You have a hunter and you have, in this case, a gatherer. Just as a note, in history, probably it was the other way around. Humans began as gatherers and later became hunters. But whatever, it's a model, right? So now they complement and help each other, right? So this is a good thing. And now you've created a new balance because now you have less mechanical solidarity perhaps, but now you're going to have some organic solidarity. Now as history develops, you go in theory from a state of pure mechanical solidarity because everybody's identical, right? Or at least in theory, right? To a state of pure organic solidarity because everybody's different. Now, at any stage of history, you will have a mix. But the idea is that as we go through this cycle, society will get more and more organic, right? So, for example, in the Middle Ages, most people were still on the farms, but they were growing different things, and you did have certain castes of people living in cities, doing industrial things, the nobles, the priests. So most people still had organic solidarity, but there was, mechanical solidarity, but there was a growing organic solidarity as people did different things and grew different types of crops. And of course, with industry, then you have more specialization. Now you have people working in mines, people working in factories. And these people sometimes have similarities, right? You have factory workers get together and form a union using their similarities. But also there's organic solidarity between them and other people. Until eventually in post-industrial society, right, at least at the time Durkheim was writing, he was thinking of the distant future. People become so specialized, now everybody's on the internet, we're all doing different things, at least in theory. And so most of our solidarity is now based on our differences. And so sharing things becomes more the norm as opposed to our similarity. Right? So as this cycle repeats itself, society is transformed. And you notice the process itself doesn't rely on technological change. The technological change itself is pushed by the social change, the competition, and the conflict that occurs out of that competition. And he used several examples. So, for example, he talked about the law and how in the past the law had to be very repressive and had to push people into always being the same. Same with religion. Everybody had to have the same religion in a given society. Now, there's a lot more freedom. So we still have religion, but people get to choose their own religions. They get to change religions. So religions reflect more differences and individuality. So Durkheim saw this as a moral process because there was a net positive effect in society. Not just because we have more things. I mean, obviously we have more productivity, we have more technology, but because he believed organic solidarity was stronger than mechanical solidarity. For example, it's all very nice for everybody to be the same, but maybe it gets kind of boring. And after all, if we're the same and you disappear, after a while I'll just forget because everybody's the same. It's like, well, where's Sam? He disappeared. I don't know, Sam. Well, everybody's called Sam, so what Sam are you talking about? Right? Whereas in modern society, everybody's different. So when people are different and they disappear, you miss them, right? You say, well, I miss Sarah. She had that weird pink hair and the weird clothes, and she was different, and we missed that. So anyway, that's the theory. So his argument, following positivism, is that as society becomes more complex, more organic, it goes through these stages of development and becomes stronger. But he didn't say there wouldn't be problems along the way. One is, of course, remember, conflict is part of the model. Conflict will happen because people will compete, right? So, and if people don't change, if people are stubborn, perhaps, that competition can get out of hand and it can lead to a major crisis. It can lead to wars. So he's saying these problems we have in society, it's not because of society itself. It's because we don't allow society to change smoothly. We need to help society develop in a proper way. So, for example, helping people find new solutions. When people are put out of work because of new processes or because of high levels of competition, Durkheim would say, well, let's find them new types of jobs. But to a large extent, people should go out and find their own jobs, but we can help them. But he did believe that you needed a strong regulatory state most of the time to regulate the types of problems that might emerge. Another problem is the difference between mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. So in the model, mechanical solidarity goes down first because of competition. Once people stop competing, they don't have solidarity anymore, at least not across those barriers. And they haven't become different yet, so the organic solidarity hasn't grown. So what he said is this creates a state of normlessness. People no longer share the same norms, but they haven't accepted new norms yet. Right? So the solution is to promote new values, new forms of similarity that can lay over our social system. So he suggested, for example, developing a civil religion around the state, patriotism, flags, symbols of state power. Of course, this was already happening anyway, but he believed that with the decline, that over time religion would decline in importance because religion is ultimately based on commonality. So you needed something new to bring people together. So some kind of maybe patriotic religion or zeal would be good. Unfortunately, maybe that helped create things like fascism and communism. So who knows? Or promote civil society groups, promote unions, for example, provided a function in that sense, at least for a while. He recommended very similar types of organizations to basically give people a sense of belonging. Community organizations, NGOs, and frankly, when you look around, these types of solutions are still being suggested today. People say we need something to give kids something to do in the neighborhood because they're bored. Let's give them activities and things like that. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this lecture on Durkheim, and come back next time. I'll see you. We'll talk about Marx.